Hey, yo, what's going on, you guys? We got a brand new episode of Buy or Bust, and today we're going to be talking about the Thunderbolt Ross himself. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. In case you guys did not know, Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross is the brand new Series 5 card releasing on Tuesday with the ability, when your opponent ends a turn with unspent energy, draw a card with 10 or more power. You're going to have a prime example of this on screen right now, and this is a card that you really haven't seen kind of anything like this before, with a targeted draw. You know, Big Dumb Idiots already has been pretty popular, and now you're getting another bonus card to be able to help you kind of elevate either your curve or just be able to reach cards in your deck you probably wouldn't be able to reach otherwise. Of course, you know, maybe it is a little niche, maybe it's not, but let's go ahead and jump right into some key synergies for this card itself. One of the, of course, primary synergies you're going to have with this card is going to be Scar. It's a 10-powered card, and if you're drawing a bunch of 10-powered cards and you're able to play them out on the board, you're going to be able to play your Scar probably close to free, if not for free. Of course, that does warrant your opponent having to float energy. If it's 1 energy, 2 energy, 3 energy, it doesn't matter. As long as they float energy, you'll be drawing extra cards with Thunderbolt Ross. And more often than not, this card, like already, like these Big Dumb Idiots decks already have so many just like, I don't know. I feel like whenever I face Big Dumb Idiots, they always have the draws no matter what, and it's like a cope stay if you stay in it. So now they have another card that can almost guarantee that they have those draws too, which means, of course, they're going to be running Surtur as well. Surtur loves Thaddeus, Mr. Thunderbolt Ross himself, because the more 10-power cards. He also gets the buff, you know, when these two cards go hand in hand. Also, shout out to Drewski for this third one over here. Black Knight, honestly, you're more often than not running into some instances where you either don't have your discards or you don't have big cards to discard. And if you have your Black Knight on the board with your Thunderbolt Ross as well, and you have these opportunities to draw cards to be able to discard, your Black Knight does get value as well. Now, going on to the counters, of course, who other would we think of when it comes to a card that counters another card than Red Guardian? Red Guardian, of course, is still running rampant. It is a 2-powered card, Thaddeus Ross himself, so Red Guardian kind of, you know, can eat this up if Thaddeus Ross is the lowest powered card in its area. It's just an immediate Red Guardian target, which maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe getting the Red Guardian out early is better than it Red Guardian in armor, or like a other card that may be more key or vital for you, and maybe instead of like a Surtur. So just keep that in mind as well, but Red Guardian, of course, does eat this card up. Of course, Cassandra Nova is another card that does impact this as well, because this takes away power from those 10-powered cards in your deck. It doesn't matter if your opponent does float energy now if you have Cassandra Nova on the board, because you may not have any 10-powered cards left in your deck to be able to draw. So Thaddeus Ross would actually do nothing in that sense as well. And then, of course, Shang-Chi, if you are drawing these cards, that means your opponent knows you're going to have 10-power cards to play, which means Shang-Chi also will be ready to destroy those 10-power cards as well. But let's go ahead and jump into some of these pros and cons, the good and the bad, when it comes to Thaddeus Ross himself. Of course, one of the first goods with this card is a passive ability, meaning it is not an on-reveal or an ongoing. It is just on the board and is proactive every single turn, meaning if your opponent missed energy on turn 2, you would draw a card. If they missed on turn 3, you would draw a card. It's something that can happen repeatedly. The only way to shut this off would be with like a Lady Deathstrike or with a Red Guardian, like we said, or even Cassandra Nova, so they can't draw any more of those 10-power cards because they don't have any more 10-power cards. The other things I was thinking about when it comes to the good, it's targeted draw. There's no other really cards in the game that are like targeting what you draw. Bullseye was data mined way back when to guarantee you drew a 2-cost. This guarantees you draw a 10-powered card if you have 10-powered cards in your deck. That is really solid. It makes your opponent have to play out cards maybe they weren't trying to play out anyways, maybe not optimized in order to make sure you don't get your draws. Because playing some of these Big Dumb Idiots decks, if you can't account for the power, it's not even just one lane, it's kind of across the board, you kind of just hard lose. So making sure that your opponent is playing out everything. Yes, Wiccan is a thing, but Wiccan doesn't happen every single game. Maybe you think it does because your opponent maybe gets Wiccan every single time, but more often than not, you're chasing the right curve, and you're more often than not going to get more value out of Thaddeus Ross than you think. So if you are sleeping on this card, I'm just saying, you just might be surprised by it. And then it's easy to play on curve. It's a 2-cost. You can play it on curve. Even if you play it a little bit later, it's not as bad. But when you go to the bad, it is low-powered. Like I said, Red Guardian just eats it up. Red Guardian is very popular right now. You do have to have 10 or more powered cards in your deck to be able to actually get value out of this card, or you're not really going to be able to optimize it the way you think you can. So just keep that in mind. It's a bad late draw, meaning if you get this on turn 6, it's very bad. Turn 5, it can be bad. Of course, you're kind of limiting your options there. You're praying your opponent skips energy on turn 5 in order to be able to get Thaddeus Ross to work. So not great there, but anything earlier than that, you have multiple opportunities for that interaction to happen for you to be able to get those draws. And like I said, Red Guardian is still everywhere, has not been adjusted, still is a 3/3, so we'll see what happens there. But let's go ahead and talk about the floor and the ceiling for this card. So going first off, we do have the ceiling over here. You play this out on curve, and your opponent doesn't spend all their energy 2 or more turns. You have Thaddeus Ross with the passive ability. That is 2 draws, or potentially more, of 10 or more power. You're pretty much thinning out your own deck, as well as being able to fill out your Big Dumb Idiots or your Sauron or your, Black Knight discard. Like, there's so many different ways. Like, maybe they're more niche ways, but if your opponent skips energy 2 turns, you get 2 additional draws that you wouldn't have gotten in the game as well, which allows you to pretty much play out your combo, which is absolutely incredible. Of course, the worst case scenario is, you play this out at the end of the game, you don't get any options, or your opponent spends all the energy. If your opponent has the perfect curve the entire game, Thaddeus Ross is not going to work. So in that sense, you're not going to get any value from Thaddeus Ross there, but I think optimally, you're going to probably get your opponent to float energy 1 turn, which gives you an additional draw, but still getting 1 extra draw more than your opponent is really solid, because that can also just make or break the game for you. Because, it's an extra draw. I mean, literally, think about it. Yes, it's targeted, but having an extra draw is really key in it, giving you another opportunity to just overcome maybe your current situation and just power through, or just continue to just step on your opponent's toes and just, slaughter them. No? Maybe? I don't know. But yeah, anywho, we're going to jump into the decks we have built for this as well. One of the very first decks we did build is a Sauron list. It is kind of similar to the Sauron list that you've seen running around. I believe KM posted. I don't know who made it, maybe before KM, but it's kind of the same kind of shell in the sense where you get Cold Obsidian, Typhoid Mary, Red Skull, and Scar as 4 different potential draws for your Thaddeus Ross. You're also getting some Ares value here. You're not running Shuri in this list. So you're not trying to Taskmaster, Shuri, anything. You're just trying to play out big cards, which I honestly like more. And I've been a huge Shuri Sauron enjoyer since the very beginning. But not having to rely on Shuri seems like it makes the deck better. And it gives you a bunch of different ins and outs in order to either counter your opponent or just literally overwhelm your opponent with power. The next list we do have over here is just some more Big Dumb Idiots. Of course, you're having Thaddeus Ross in here, and maybe instead of another 1-drop, you're able to kind of pump out your curve a little bit more. And I was talking about this with Glazer. Glazer brought up an amazing point. Running Heimdall in your Scar list, so you can move around those 10 power that your opponent maybe is going to Shang-Chi, probably more often than not, because they think it's going to be just floating in that lane. You're going to have priority because you're also going to have so much power on the board. You move those cards around, and then your opponent's Shang-Chi play doesn't work the way it was supposed to. You, of course, have Armor and Cosmo to also protect your cards against some of these Shang-Chis as well, so just keep that in mind. And then the next list we have is going to be a high evo list. This might be probably more copium side of things, but even just a She-Hulk, Hulk, or Infinite, those are 3 different cards you could potentially draw that you may be waiting out for more often than not. Yes, this is really bad into an opponent's Thaddeus Ross itself, but you do have Shang-Chi against those type of situations as well. Just really trying to see if high evo can make a comeback at some point. Sauron kind of made a comeback this past season, so it's time for high evo to make a comeback. Please, second dinner, if you are watching this, buff high evo in some sense. It doesn't have to be anything crazy like Cyclops. Maybe you make the thing a little bit better. Please maybe rework the Shocker. But anywho, let's go ahead and move on over to the Spotlight Week. This is where it gets a little interesting. So in Spotlights this week, we do have Thaddeus Ross, Blink, and Nebula. This is the first time that the Season Pass Blink is back in Spotlights in almost a year. Yes, it's a little less than a year. I think it's probably 9 months. I think she came out last May. But it's the first time Blink is back in Spotlights, which is really interesting. Of course, this is 2 Series 5 cards with Thaddeus Ross and Blink. Nebula is a Series 4 card. If you're missing Nebula, it might be a okay time to pick her up. She has been power crept by a lot of 1-drops, but still is not a bad card to have, especially earlier on in collection levels. But when we go towards the overall value of this list, I do think this is a pretty strong week. I think if you're missing Blink, Blink is a very good card to have. She is way more flexible and in more decks than you think at the moment, whether it is Hella, whether it is just random Husky list with, Misery and, War Machine and all those kind of cards. This card you're seeing more often than not, and it does give you some value. If you guys do not know what Blink does, it is an on reveal, swap the last card you played with a card that costs more. So you can use this to reach cards that are deeper in your deck that you may not have had on the board, which is why I like, Thaddeus Ross as well, because you're able to reach into your deck and get those 10-powered cards if your opponent floats energy. And then Nebula is a just passive ability, gets +2 power if your opponent did not play a card on Nebula's location. So it's a passive +2, and your opponent does have to play a card on her location every single turn. If not, Nebula does not get that ability. So that over there makes these cards a little bit flexible. Yes, Nebula has been crept, but I do think Blink is way more flexible. These variants are really solid. What their abilities do are going to be good as well. So I think this is a pretty good week to open, especially if you're missing Blink. Even if you don't want Ross, Blink is a great card to have in your collection, wavering the line of must-have, in my opinion. Thaddeus Ross, of course, is another Series 5 card, which would be great to have as well. But we'll talk more about him here in a little bit when I look at the community's rating opposed to my rating. So here's what I've seen in the community. I haven't seen a lot of people really high on this card. I know Glazer and I have been high on this card. I've seen some other creators that are really low on this card, think it's a skip, think it's too niche, think, you should play something else instead. Why would you want Thaddeus Ross? Just play your other cards, or you're going to have discounted cards anyways. But, are you sure about that? I know it's not as flexible. I know we're thinking just big dumb idiots. We don't think this card's going to be adjusted. It's another Bruce Banner is what I heard someone say the other day. And it just baffled me because I'm pretty high on this card, if you guys haven't been able to tell. I think having a targeted draw, having it so your opponent does have to play out the maximum amount of energy each turn, or this card will help you get more draws than they will get, I think is incredible. I don't think it is a 5-star card, but I do think, like Glazer said, this has the potential to be the card of the season. It really does. I do think it's going to get Red Guardian a lot, but if Red Guardian happens earlier, that allows you to be able to do stuff later in the game and not worry about Red Guardian, which also is incredible. I think just the whole psychology aspect of it. Yes, Wiccan does happen, and maybe people do get their Wiccan curve way more than you think they do, but the odds of that honestly aren't that high all the time. It really just depends on what type of Wiccan they're playing. There's a lot of time and a lot of decks and a lot of situations that offset that. I think I didn't talk about Iceman, but Iceman is a great card. Even you guys saw in Drewski's video probably too. Iceman is a very good Disrupt Cup card that can really enable this as well. But this card overall, if we're going to give the final verdict here, I think is a snap. Yes, it is going to be very specific for what it does. It's going to be niche in that sense of, yes, it does have to have 10 power or more. But when this card hits, it is going to really hit. And it helps those big dumb idiots decks even more, which are just going to get even better next season with Firebrand or Starbrand. There's so many just different options that's going to just make this card continue to improve and get better in value. If you guys do not like this style of decks, then you could totally, not get this card as well because it doesn't fit your play style, which of course when we talk about our final notes and we conclude here, wait a few days. I could totally be wrong about this card. There are definitely times where I am absolutely entirely wrong about cards and they don't measure up the way we think they are. They don't work the way we think they will. The meta is just not in the right spot for them, but bad cards do get buffed and good cards do get nerfed. Spend your resources on cards that you are genuinely going to play, since resources still are scarce in this game. Truly wait a couple days, see what other content creators say as well, see what other decks other people are playing before you fully invest into this. There are a lot of good cards coming out in March, probably some better cards than all the cards this season. So just keep that in mind going into this next season, going into this week with Thaddy Ross as well. I'm just very high on this card itself. I like some of these Big Dumb Idiots decks. I maybe don't like to face them, but I do think this is a great card for them, and it's an automatic plug-in into these decks itself. But I want to say thank you guys so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you guys did stick around to the very end, let me know down below. Does the Spotlight variant look like Dr. Eggman a little bit? The mustache kind of is giving me that vibe. But anywho, once again, I really thank you guys so much for watching. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Until the next time, you guys have a good one. God bless. It's been real. And yeah, Tucker out.